Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 178 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined, as always, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans.
So we are here today to do our usual spiel. We are a father-son duo here to talk about college football by college football fans for college football fans. And today we'll be talking about Nebraska's latest win over Northern Iowa, and also diving into the big games nationally. There's some interesting news about the Pac-12 this past week. And then we'll be previewing Nebraska's big upcoming game against Illinois that you'll be in attendance for.
Yes. Excited for this game. It's first Big Ten game. It's the 400th consecutive sellout going back to 1962. No, I didn't go to that game. Back in 62, I wasn't even born yet. So that tells you how far back that streak goes, Alex. Your dad was not even born yet.
Wow. Yeah. And you're so old.
I am. I'm an ancient dude.
And to help with our lubrication for this episode, we've got cold beverages to help us out. I've got myself my Golden Road Mango Cart.
Well, and I am imbibing in one of the last of my case of the great Canadian Pilsner, Labatt Blue. I'm going to be drinking a little Labatt Blue with you tonight, Alex. So cheers to our friends from the north, and go Big Red.
Go Big Red. Alrighty then. So we'll be diving into that Nebraska Northern Iowa game first. On the previous podcast, we gave our usual predictions. I predicted that we would win 38-14, while you predicted a bit of a higher scoring game of 49-17. And I would say I was a bit closer because the final score ended up being 34-3, where we got off to an early lead once again, and frankly, them only having 3 points kind of downplays the amount of offensive success that they did have in the game.
Correct. Yeah. This is an example of a game where, the final score is not indicative of the play on the field. And that is not a positive statement for Nebraska at all.
True. I would say my immediate reaction to you after the game, because you actually were in attendance for this one, when I called you, I was saying I felt like it was kind of a repeat of the Colorado game in a number of ways, in that we had a lot of offensive success early, and we got up to 21 points in pretty short order. But then we kind of struggled offensively from there. They made some adjustments, and we kind of slowed down in certain areas. And unlike the Colorado game, Northern Iowa actually has an offensive line. So our defense was having more trouble with them than they were against Colorado. The thing I noticed was that we were pretty consistently getting pressure on him. We were getting guys in the backfield, but to his credit, even though he's not like the best thrower out there, he was an experienced quarterback, and he was good at still making passes even with pressure in his face, or managing, to dodge a guy and then, make 5 yards out of a bad situation, with his legs and things like that. So they definitely surprised us in a few areas.
Absolutely. Well, I'm not even going to say they surprised us. Like, I don't think our coaching staff was surprised by what they did. Although I will say that I think we were not as prepared for the formations that they used, and for, they came out, Alex, and they lined up in a lot of 3, 4, and even 5 wide receiver sets, sometimes empty backfield. Then they would run out of it, right? So they were spreading us across the entire field, and then just tucking and running, and that's where our defense, I think, didn't perform at the highest of levels. Is they didn't fill as quickly as they should have, and because they were often dealing with a 230, 240 pound running back, those guys were simply falling forward. We were getting to them within the first yard or two, but then they were falling forward and getting 5, or breaking one tackle and getting 9. But their longest run from scrimmage was 11 yards.
Right. Well, and I actually, they rushed it 39 times for 139 yards, while we rushed it 22 for 142. So when you average that out, they averaged 3.5 yards per run, while we were at 6.4. Now that is
Right.
a bit skewed for us because we had one really big run later in the game that got us a lot of
Well,
yards.
we actually had 2 fairly substantial, I'll say 30 plus yard runs. And if you take those 2 plays away, then our rushing yards is paltry. So yes, you are correct.
Yeah.
And I wish, yeah. And I know that Coach Rule after the game admitted or acknowledged that they wanted to throw it early so that they could run it late, and but because of the amount of success that the other team had with basically playing keep away, getting first downs and all that sort of stuff, that kind of changed what Nebraska chose to do offensively. Ultimately, the number of snaps, that's the other big factor in this, is the actual number of plays. We didn't have very many plays. They had like 30 more plays than we did. We had 48 plays. They had 71. So whatever that is,
23.
23. Yeah, almost. That's a lot, right? Like that's
Right.
3 more drives of plays than we have.
Well, I don't even know that it was that, because like I said, we were scoring pretty quickly early on. I think there was one drive where we scored in like 4 plays. So
Right.
we were passing it a lot because it was working. Until, like I said, until they started making some adjustments, and then in the second half, I was kind of hoping we would run it some more, and we didn't quite commit to that.
Yeah, at least not until the end, until late in the fourth quarter, and then we ran it a bit.
Right. And in total, yeah, we were 20 of 26 throwing it with 1 interception, while they were 16 of 32 throwing it with 1 interception. And we had a total of 281 passing yards, while they had 162. So, we've been talking a bit about the, run pass balance for our team. And this time definitely skewed in favor of passing a bit. Once again, I think because that was really working for us earlier on in the game.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. The bottom line is our offensive line did not execute very well in the running game. They did a good job of pass protecting and Rule. Dylan Raiola did not, experience a lot of pressure. He did have to make guys miss a couple times, including one of our biggest plays where he did a great job of making a guy miss who had a clean shot on him. And that was great to see. But it was really more about our defense's inability to get them off the field. Their ability to get first downs and sustain drives, even. And I'm not just talking about the first drive, which of course was kind of epic, right? It was like 16 plays, 10 minutes. They ended up only making 3 points out of it, but it was the only 3 points they made, right? The whole game, as it turns out.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of similar, like I said, to the Colorado game in that, overall we performed well. We won solidly. We were never really in danger, in the later part of the game. But I had higher expectations of us, especially since we were going up against an FCS school. The fact that the defense did hold them to 3 points, and they got an interception, when they were driving it on us later in the game, that was quite big. So, the defense, in the end of the day, they did their job. They held them to just 3 points. We both predicted that NIU would score more on us. I said 14, you said 17. So the fact they only did 3 is good, but we're still critical of the fact that, they were able to dominate us physically at certain points.
Right. And Coach Rule made a comment that, you have 3 levels of readiness or preparation for a game. It's the mental side, the physical side, and the emotional side. And he said, we were ready mentally. we were ready physically. We were not ready emotionally, and that showed. And so he kind of took ownership of that, and also assigned that to his team captains as well, to say we can't let that happen again. We have to be emotionally ready to play every time we play.
Right.
And we were not against UNI.
Right. But there are some other areas that show some improvement. They actually had quite a few penalties, 9 for 95 yards, and there were several times where they had to take a timeout to avoid a delay of game penalty, partially because the crowd was nice and lively. You did your job of screaming their dad.
There we go. Well, and I got to give credit to the crowd, because I'll tell you, as we were walking around the stadium, we were near the stadium at some tailgates and stuff, and the tailgate lots. Literally, when we first showed up, I guess we got to our first tailgate near the stadium at around 2:00, and the game started at 7, and usually I would see the entire parking lot's already full, and there's a bevy of people meandering about, and it was dead, and the parking lots weren't even half full. Of the tailgate lots. And so I'm like, man, where the hell is everybody? But sure enough, when we got into that stadium, and 10 minutes before the game, you look up and I don't see an empty seat. And so everybody showed up, man. Ultimately, they all showed up, and it was pretty darn loud in there. It wasn't epically loud like it was the previous week, but it was still very loud.
Yeah. Meanwhile, for Nebraska, we were only had 4 penalties for 44 yards, so a definite improvement from the embarrassing situation with Colorado the previous week. And also, when you look at third and fourth downs, they were 6 of 16 on third downs, so we stopped them quite a bit on third down, whereas we were 4 of 7 on third downs, and they were 2 of 4 on fourth downs. We were 0 of 1. So that was the spread there.
Well, and and our fourth down was at the end of the half, right? Was we were trying to get something done and see if we can make some points there just before halftime. So that's that 0 for 1 on fourth downs. The 6 of 16 for third downs for them is deceptive to me, because but it makes me realize how many times they didn't even get to third down.
Right.
They converted in 2 downs and got a first down, because they did end up with quite a good number of first downs. I mean, we had 22, they had 18, so they almost matched us in first downs. And the other huge stat is, we're going through the stat thing, is time of possession. Their time of possession was almost twice ours. They basically held the ball for 38 minutes, and we held it for 22. And that's unacceptable. Just unacceptable that our defense couldn't get a FCS school off the field.
Right.
And it was because they were just getting enough, right? And I guarantee you that Illinois has put this film up and is talking about this with their team all the time. If you guys give great effort, if you guys push hard, then this Nebraska team, it's this 3-3-5. The thing they give up is the beef. Okay, because there ain't enough big boys. So we're going to lean on them, and we're going to fall forward, and we're going to get first downs, right? We're going to just edge over the line, because we're just bigger, because we're just a little stronger. We're going to do that one last block, that one little lean forward, and we're going to get the first downs. And if we can keep possession of this ball, we'll score, we'll strike and get some points, and Nebraska will get frustrated. So I guarantee you that's the game plan for our upcoming opponent.
Yep. One last thing I want to talk about before we get to Illinois is in terms of the kicking game. I think because we went for it on that fourth down and manageable, and we didn't get it at the end of the first half, like you said, when we got in those situations again later in the game, we decided to kick them, and we did make 2 field goals in the game, a 31-yarder and a 21-yarder, so no crazy numbers, but Alvano came out and did his job, and the snap went clean, unlike during Colorado, so that gave me a little bit of optimism on that side of the ball.
Right, and our punter didn't punt.
Right, that's
true.
Didn't
have a punt. So, but yes, and actually, Alex, both of the field goals that we watched that were close to our end of the field because we were on an end zone were not great, kick it down the middle type of kicks. One of them kind of was to one side. It kind of barely snuck in, as well as one extra point barely snuck in on one side of the goalpost. So Tristan is still not kicking with great control and consistency. I would say I'm not real comfortable with his kicking. I would say, maybe 35 and in, you could hope that he's going to do well. Anything beyond 35 yards, and I think you're asking for him to rise above the level of performance that he's currently at.
Right. And then there was a series in the second half of the game where we brought in Heinrich Harburg. He caught a pass from Dylan, which was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then we brought him in, as the QB at one point. And we saw some mixed results because actually, while he got like a nice first down, then like that drive actually kind of stalled out. I think we had to bring out the kicker and kick the field goal. But I saw Matt Rule say after the game that even more so than what Harburg brings to our table in terms of being able to bring him in as this, kind of extra option, it's the mind games we can play with the opponents by having him and forcing them to scheme against the possibility of us bringing him out is almost just as effective as the weapon itself.
Exactly. And the thing is that he then came out late in the game with the number 2 offense and led a great drive that led to a score. He threw some nice passes. He did some good things and then ultimately handed off to Emmett Johnson, who ran for 24 yards for a touchdown. Right. So, but I thought Heinrich had a good game from that standpoint. The only downside was there was a couple of run plays that they gave him where he didn't do super well. But the thing is that with his speed, if he ever gets a hole, and he can get up to full speed, he's like the fastest guy on the field. Probably after 10 yards, he's definitely the fastest guy on the field. Right. He may not accelerate as fast as some of the littler guys, but you get that 6'5" stride of his going, and there aren't many people that are going to chase him down. So that's what they're trying to do, is get that speed and find a way to utilize him. So
yeah, well, and it's also if you can do it successfully, it's definitely a way to energize the crowd, because every time he's come in for a play that's worked, the crowd really gets fired up. Obviously, we prefer Dylan as an overall quarterback. He's got a way better arm and all that kind of thing. But I think people in Nebraska love a running quarterback, for one. And, the fact that he led us to our wins last year and is clearly a good kid and is sticking with the program and everything, I want to see more stuff like that in our future games.
Yes, I totally agree. I was pleased to see it. I understand why Coach was doing it, and I think we will see it again. I don't think this is just a one-time thing. And, the only one I don't like is when they put, Dylan, they keep Dylan out there, but they actually put Harburg, under center, if you will, or behind the center in shotgun. And then Dylan is just out wide. In a play like that, you're effectively saying, we're not going to throw the ball to Dylan. We're not going to ask Dylan to catch the ball and potentially get smacked by some DB who's coming full bore at him, right? So when you choose to put him as a wide receiver, you might as well play with 10 guys. Because defensively, I'm not going to respect the likelihood that you're going to throw to Dylan.
The only situation where that might be useful is like, if it's a 3rd and 1, or you're right at the goal line or whatever, where it's like, you're going to run, and it's just like, well, go ahead and stop us, and you bring in Harburg to be that guy to just do a QB dive or whatever.
Exactly right. So we'll see. But I'm excited about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I remembered one last thing I want to mention, which is I did mention Dylan had 1 interception, but I'm not too worried about it because it was a long ball, a deep ball that went out to one of our receivers, and it was one of those situations where he was really fighting with the UNI defender, and the UNI defender kind of ended up with the ball, more in his hands when all was said and done after the tussle, and the refs called it a interception, but it was close for sure. Like you could argue that it was a tie and our offensive guy should have gotten it, or like that he had possession of the ball when like they hit the ground and then the UNI got it later. That's one of those weird situations. So I'm not too concerned about that.
No, I'm not either. And for the same reasons that you just described, I feel like our receiver caught the ball and was the first one to possess it, but the other guy's hands were definitely on it as well. And he ultimately was stronger and simply took it away from our smaller receiver, basically. Lloyd was who it was. And hopefully our receiver is going to learn. Well, that's why you have to have strong hands and strong fingers, and you need to be able to pull that thing in and not let them have it, because that fight for the ball is it's part of football.
Yeah. Now, obviously, like you said, Illinois is our next game, our first game in the Big Ten. It's at home for Nebraska, so you'll be there in attendance. But it's definitely a big game. Mm-hmm. Illinois is also 3-0 going into this game. Last week they beat Central Michigan 30-9. I did not watch that game live, but I did watch the highlights afterwards. The things I took note of are the fact that it was actually a pretty close game at halftime. Right. Central Michigan was, they were struggling on offense, right? They're having to kick field goals, but their defense was doing a good job. They sacked Illinois' quarterback a couple times, but Illinois kind of took it away in the second half, and they also made a 59-yard field goal. So in terms of the kicking battle, They definitely have the advantage there.
Absolutely. I was going to mention that as well in our discussion about Illinois. Yeah, they have a great kicker. And the irony is that was his first field goal. That he had never kicked a field goal before in competition. He had kicked extra points, but he had never kicked a field goal. So the dude's got a strong leg for sure.
Yeah.
And that might very well come into, that's exactly what, again, strategically, their game plan is going to be somewhat similar. They'll throw it more than, and they'll attempt to be more balanced than University of Northern Iowa was. But what they want to do effectively is exactly what Northern Iowa did. They're going to want to try to dink and dunk and power football us into long extended drives that occupy our defense and wear our defense down, and then limit the number of opportunities that our explosive offense has, and then get it to the fourth quarter, and then whenever they can, chunk in a 3-point field goal here and there, because we can't match that, right? If this becomes a game of field goals, we're in trouble. And even though we might be better, we might have more talent, especially on offense, and even defensively, we have individual players that are maybe better than their individual players. But if we don't collectively stop their running game and stop them from getting the short passes that allow them to control the ball, we're in trouble. So our defense has got to step up, and our offensive line damn well better be ready to establish a running game, and not hope that the passing game can open up the running game. We need to be able to say, we're going to establish running game and do it.
One thing to note is that Illinois' big win in the second week was against Kansas, which they won 23-17. But then Kansas followed that up this past weekend by playing UNLV at home and losing 23-20. So that does kind of, put a bit of a different light on that big win for Illinois. And I remember in that game, Illinois' offense, frankly, struggled. Like sometimes they would make a nice big pass, but then not get any points out of it. It was really their defense that kind of won them that game.
Yeah, if I was going to be critical of Illinois, I would say they have not yet established a running game either, right? Like they're running back by committee, somewhat like us. I don't think they have a single go-to bell cow type runner at this point. They're doing it in a rotational kind of basis, and they haven't had any kind of consistent success running the football yet. Obviously that would be something that you'd hope between that speaks to their offensive line, and it speaks to their running backs' abilities. You would hope that means we can make them one-dimensional, really shut down that running game, and then force them to become a passing team only, and then it becomes a little bit easier to defend them. The problem is they are another one of these teams that has big, bulky, huge running backs. I wish we'd just get a team that's kind of more normal, but they have 240-pound monster running back, who can just lean forward and get four, and that's the weakness of the 3-3-5. I would feel better if we had more big boys that we could actually put into the game, and we had repetitions at it where, okay, we'll just go to a 4-3 for game situations where we're going up against a team like Illinois. And then when we have to play a team that's going to throw it all over the yard, like let's say an Indiana or maybe even a Purdue, we do our 3-3-5. But we've got to have the big boys, the big bodies, ready and capable of defending and shutting down a running game. And we didn't do that last week against UNI.
Well, and like we said, this is the start of the Big Ten season for us, and I would say kind of dividing our season into sections. This is kind of the start of the second part of 4 games, which are Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, and Indiana before we have to go play Ohio State. And of those 4, I would say Illinois and Indiana are the 2 I'm the most scared of. This Illinois quarterback has already put up numbers that are similar to Raiola's in terms of completion percentage, total passing yards, touchdowns. He's thrown 0 interceptions.
And he's not a freshman.
Right.
Yeah, he's not a freshman. He started last year for him.
Right. So, you said that we would need to shut down their running game and force them to pass, but even if we accomplish that, they could still beat us with the passing game, theoretically.
Absolutely. And I'm still uncomfortable. I love Herzog. He's leading our team in interceptions. He's got 2, in 3 games. And I love his toughness, and I just liked him as a football player. But he is a matchup nightmare for us because he's so damn short. And every time we run into these teams that have these tall wide receivers, last week against UNI, I was fretting the whole game because UNI, ironically, had 3 tall, big receivers. They had 3 wide receivers who were as big as ours. And I thought, we have big receivers for the first time ever at Nebraska on our own team. And here is UNI with guys that are the same. It just blew me away. And so I don't know how many of the big guys they have. I think they only have 2. So hopefully that means we'll be able to line, Herzog up with a slot guy who's maybe only 6 foot or something. I just hate it when he lines up against somebody who's 6'3".
Right.
Because he's like 5'8" on his best day.
Right. Now, according to the people in Vegas, we are the favorites going into the Illinois game. 8.5 is the current spread. So, we've got good momentum. We've got, the home crowd. It's another night game. It's, like you said, it's the 400th consecutive sellout in Nebraska history. So there's going to be an extra kind of boost of energy just from that alone. So to your point, I think it's important that we get out and score a touchdown early, not a field goal, but a touchdown. Because to your point, if it becomes a kind of battle of field position and field goals, I think we lose that battle to them. So we need to kind of show our explosiveness. And if they're getting the field goals, with their 59-yard kicker, while we're getting touchdowns, in the end, that will pay dividends for us.
Right. I agree. Yep. And our defense has been pretty good about, even if we do give up some of these first downs, we stiffen when it gets closer to the goal line. And we end up stopping them, or we get a pick, or something positive happens for our defense, right? So that's a good thing. But I sure would like us to do some more 3 and outs. I'd like us to shut people down, and then you can really build momentum. If we could have some success on offense, then have the defense go out there, 3 and out somebody, and then get the ball right back and go down and score again. Now all of a sudden the pressure is totally thrown on them. Now they're the one that's having to adjust, not us. And that helps our defense then for the rest of the game. But when we let them line up and beat us to death and march it down the field and consume 10 minutes, then it's all the momentum's in their favor.
Right.
So we just cannot let them do what you and I did to us.
Right. And as I mentioned, even Central Michigan was getting some pressure and some sacks on them. So I think we'll get even more so. And we'll have to see how their quarterback
Yeah.
responds to that.
Yes, I agree.
Giving our predictions for the game, I'm going to go ahead and say that we win and that it's a little bit higher scoring, because I think that benefits us in this situation. So I'm going to say that we end up winning 31 to, let's say, 21 over Illinois.
Okay, that would be a good win. That'd be a good win. That's a great score. Um, Boy, I'm gonna say I was gonna go higher, but I'm like you. I think it's not going to be as high scoring. I think there's going to be a little more. There's going to be a little more nerves because this one matters. It's Big Ten now. It's Big Ten conference game, and I know that they're going to be physically fired up and ready to go. But I think we should be also. I think we're going to have, like you say, the emotional component's going to be there this week, and our defense is feeling probably a little pressure about how poorly they played this week. I mean, it was very clear in Coach White's press conference today as a coordinator that he was not pleased with a lot of the things that happened last week. So I expect our defense to play pretty well, but I still think they're gonna score their points. So I'm gonna say it's 28-16 Nebraska.
8-16. All right, we're pretty close there.
Yep, with them kicking 3 field goals and a touchdown.
Okay. Then in other Nebraska-related news, the volleyball team has been playing, their usual games, and you actually went and attended one. You mentioned on the last podcast the Crichton game, and that actually ended up being quite an entertaining set at the very least, or an entertaining game. It went Nebraska's way 3-2, where we won the first 2 sets and then lost the third set in like a really tight back and forth, like 33-31 type score. How was that to watch live?
It was incredible, and we were so close to just 3-and-outing them. I've actually had the pleasure of going again later in the week and watched them play a top 15 ranked Arizona State team, and we beat them 3-0. And frankly, the Creighton match should have been very similar. We actually were beating Creighton in the third set, 20-16. So we had a 4-point lead as we got into what's called the red zone, the last five points of the set, and yet we allowed them to come all the way back from that 4-point deficit and actually take a lead, and they got a set point before we did. But then we went back and forth, and then John Cook made an epic poor coaching decision, which he doesn't. It's not a lot of times when I'm criticizing his coaching decisions, but this one was absolutely a mistake by him. He even admitted it after the game that it was a mistake. And he said lesson learned. But the truth is, he's made this mistake multiple times, including he lost an NCAA tournament 2 years ago to Oregon because of this, or maybe it was 3 years ago. He has a propensity, I think, to get emotional with some of his substitution choices. And when you are doing all the substituting that we do in volleyball, you're limited to 15 substitutions per set. And with all the substitutions we're normally doing in our rotations, if you get into extra points like we did in that particular set, you're going to run out of substitutions. So before that happens, you need to get a rotation set that you can live with and stay with it the rest of that particular set. He didn't do that. He got cocky, thought for sure we'll have won this thing before this substitution affects me in a negative way, and he went ahead and let Laney Choboy go in for his last substitution. Laney Choboy, who is 5'3", ended up playing middle in the front row. And amazingly, we literally got her all the way through the front row, all 3 of her rotations in the front row, and before we lost. If we had won one more and been able to tie it one more time, at 32 instead of losing 33-31, then she would have rotated back to the back row, and we would have then had a whole another 3 cycles with quote quote a normal setup. But we did not have a reasonable block in the front row for the end of that, which led to us losing ultimately. And then they completely annihilate us in set 4. That decision and that loss of that epic set, we let it beat us a second set because we played probably our worst set of the season the next set. But then we came out and played probably our best set of the season in the 5th set and dominated and won. So yeah, it's the beauty of that game is there's nothing like the momentum of a game where or a match where you have individual games that allow you to basically push the reset button up to 5 times. And that's one of the things that makes volleyball such an awesome sport and so exciting.
Yeah, that's true. Similar to tennis in that way.
Yes.
And this week, as we're recording, they have an upcoming game at Stanford. That's another very big opponent for the girls.
Yeah. Stanford is ranked number 2. We're ranked number 5, but Stanford's coming into Lincoln. Stanford just beat Texas 3-0 in a straight set dominant victory out in Palo Alto just last Sunday. So just a few days ago. So, they're coming in on a huge high where they have been performing really well, and they've got victories over Wisconsin and I think Louisville and then of course Texas. They've really had a great early season, Stanford, and they're playing at a very high level. We're not. We're still struggling. So it'll be very interesting to see if we can hang with the Stanford team at this point in the season. I think we have more talent than them. I think we have a higher ceiling than Stanford, but I'm not sure we're ready to battle this team. If we find a way, I think that's going to be a defining moment for Nebraska volleyball season is a victory over Stanford tomorrow night.
All right. Well, we'll be rooting for the girls for sure.
Yes.
And then in national news, obviously we'll be talking about the big week 3 games. But the big news that came out was that the Pac-12, otherwise known as the Pac-2, decided to add some more schools from the Mountain West. So it's been announced that they'll be adding Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, and San Diego State. So they are leaving the Mountain West by 2026, the 2026 academic year. So they're joining Oregon State and Washington State, bringing them up to 6 total teams. And there's even now been speculation that they may be adding more, such as Tulane and Memphis.
Right. Tulane and Memphis. Wow, that's a long way. That'll be another, across the country. I'm just not sure how they can make that work. I mean, if you want to have a national conference that goes from coast to coast like the Big Ten, then you need to have the money to pay for all that travel, right? And the hotels and the complexity of managing academic schedules and all that stuff, right? And I don't care how many teams the Pac-12 puts together out of this kind of a grouping, you're not going to be in the same stratosphere as the Big Two in terms of the kind of TV contract you're going to get, right? So number one, I question whether that will work. I think they have to try their best to make the Pac-12 at least initially a regional a conference like the SEC is, right? That's the strength of the SEC, or one of them, is the fact that they have remained primarily a southeastern conference, with their longest stretch being Texas, which is clearly south. So I don't know. And here's my question, and Alex, you may be able to answer this better than me. I gotta believe that they attempted to have conversation with the Mountain West to say, hey, would you guys be willing to merge? Because it would have been, I feel, way smarter for the Mountain West to arrive at some kind of a compromise where they could have benefited from the huge pile of money that the Pac-2 were going to get by virtue of all the exit fees that they received from all those schools that left the Pac-12. They're sitting on a mountain of cash that they could have then disseminated, right? And given all of those schools within the Mountain West, and all the Mountain West would have had to do was give up their name, right? And said, we'll do it. But so the negotiation is, we're going to get certain concessions about staffing with Mountain West staff people and all that, but we'll take and integrate the Pac-12 name because it obviously has more prestige and history than the Mountain West does. That seems like that would have been a no-brainer. The fact that they had to go and poach just seems wrong to me.
Yeah, I've not seen any. I mean, I'll start by saying I did not look into it super closely. I just looked at one article. But I did not see anything about them attempting that. I saw the statement being made that what the Pac-12 is offering in terms of media deal money is somewhere north of $10 million a year, which is, obviously not a lot compared to the bigger conferences, but still an upgrade compared to what the Mountain West can offer. So for those schools, it made sense to join.
Sure. But, so, and that kind of conversation, like I was describing, would have happened probably last summer, right? It wouldn't have happened recently. It seems like they would have broached that idea way up front. Like as soon as they knew they were the Pac-2, right? And it's like once they went through the process of what's next, are we going to just disband or are we going to try to retain? Once the decision was made to retain the Pac-12 as a conference, then I think you go to the Mountain West and you have that conversation. And maybe they did, and the Mountain West either wasn't willing to compromise or had no interest and just said, go away. And so then the Pac-12 had their next strategy was to go and poach.
Yep, but I'm pleased to see that the Pac-12 is surviving, if it is in a diminished state compared to its former glory. So we'll keep an eye on that. It sounds like they are still hungry to expand further, so there may be more news on that front.
Right. I wonder if they're going to go and try to nip at the heels of some of the Pac-12 schools that went to the Big 12, like an Arizona State, and see if they could entice a couple of those schools to come back to the Pac-12, just from the standpoint of the historic connection.
I was just reminded, I did see one headline that was saying something like that the previous Pac-12 commissioner was obviously no longer there. When the conference was falling apart last year, he was offered some sort of deal that basically would have included these 4 schools from the Mountain West and then kept Cal and Stanford in the conference as well. And he turned it down. He rejected that deal, which obviously looks pretty silly in hindsight.
Right. Well, I wonder if they would go back to a Stanford, and Cal and ask that question, because I have a feeling that particularly Stanford is not pleased with being in the ACC. They did that out of just survival instinct,
right?
To go to the ACC. Now, obviously, the ACC is already at $35 or so million a year, so you're not going to walk away from that if you're Stanford, unless the Pac-12 can come up with some kind of a package that pays you that kind of money, going back to the Pac-12 or pretty close to it. And it seems like, based on all the exit fees that they got, that they should be sitting on a stack of money that was big enough that if the leadership was wise, they could figure out a way to give Stanford a better deal than everybody else, just to get them back in the conference.
Right. Yeah, could be. Now switching to the national games, we did give a couple predictions on the last podcast. One was Arizona versus Kansas State, which was a matchup of 2 closely ranked teams. I predicted that Arizona would pull off the upset and win 27-21. Well, you predicted the opposite score, but going Kansas State's way. But it ended up being quite dominant for Kansas State, 31-7. So I was definitely wrong on that little soul read of mine.
Well, and Kansas State looked great. Kansas State looks like they might rightly be one of the best teams in the Big 12 based on that performance. They looked like a finely tuned machine.
Yeah, that was it was impressive for sure. And then the other game we predicted was Alabama versus Wisconsin. I predicted that Alabama would win, but I thought Wisconsin might keep it close since they were playing at home. So I predicted a 28-24 win for Alabama. You went higher scoring for Alabama, 38-21. But it turns out both of us were downselling it a bit because it ended up being 42-10. Admittedly, with Wisconsin having their starting quarterback be injured during the game, which obviously did not help matters for them.
Right. And they had turnovers, and frankly, it could have been worse. I mean, it looked like they were hanging with them for about, the first quarter or so, but then Alabama's talent just kind of took over.
Mm-hmm. And then Michigan was kind of interesting this week. They were playing against Arkansas State, and they ended up winning 28-18. So, a W, but you would have liked to see yourself win by more. Though I want to say that Arkansas State scored a lot very late in the game when the outcome was already kind of decided. But the big news story coming out of the game was that their starting quarterback that they'd been playing with threw 3 picks, like very early on in the game, like 3 series back to back. And so then they just brought in the backup and are now making him the starter, it sounds like. So I'm sure Brian was pulling his hair out watching that one.
Oh yeah. It's like he says, it's like we traded teams this year. And the thing is that this kid that they're going to start, he isn't some young freshman pup that they just brought onto the team. This is a guy that is like in his 3rd year at Michigan. So those 2 quarterbacks competed, through all of spring practice, and then of course through all of fall camp. And the coaching staff's assessment was that the first one was the guy, and they named him the starter. And now he's become a little bit of a turnover machine, right? Three picks in one game against Arkansas State when you're Michigan is unacceptable. I mean, you should expect that you have a clean pocket. You're not under a lot of pressure. There's all kinds of reasons why you shouldn't do that. And yet he did. So I get why they're making the change. It's absolutely what they need to do. I'm just a little surprised that they're going with this guy who has been with the program, like I say, for a few years, and he's only thrown like 7 passes. Right. He's been in the game quite a bit over those 3 years, but in mop up type duty and stuff. But he's almost always ran the football. So he's an athlete, and so you worry about if the turnover problem at Michigan from the quarterback spot is over, because I have a feeling that there's a reason why this guy never emerged. He's clearly a great athlete and he can run the football. So it's got to be his passing, right? Not knowing anything else, it's got to be his passing. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. Well, one thing you can console Brian with is the fact that it could always be worse, and you could be Florida State, who had another home game where they played against Memphis, and they lost that game 20-12. They were down 1-2 in terms of turnovers. They were getting sacked a lot, and they're having a major quarterback issue as well. The guy who transferred in is just not getting it done.
I agree. Well, and so that's interesting. I know that Florida is also struggling, and they had a meeting or whatever supposedly and so that guy's on the hot seat. And Florida State, a year removed from a undefeated season, I don't know how long the leash will be on this kid, or this coach rather, if he doesn't turn it around real soon.
Right. I mean, I think I saw a comment from somebody saying how, he just got us, to one of our best seasons ever, last year, a really good undefeated season. We should have been in the playoff, So I think he'll have a good amount of leash, but they'll definitely be putting pressure on him to bench this quarterback. I think the calls for that are pretty loud.
I think you're right.
Like you mentioned, Florida lost to Texas A&M 33-20. Frankly, that doesn't show how bad the game was for Florida, because it was 33-7 in the 3rd quarter, and so Florida scored some points later in the game when the outcome was already kind of
garbage time,
kind of decided. And similarly, Washington, who was also a national championship contender last year, was upset by Washington State in their rivalry game. Washington had 4 field goals in that game, so that tells you a lot about that particular loss.
Right. And it was a close loss. It wasn't a blowout or anything, but yeah, it just shows you that, Washington's still trying to find its legs after all the change that they have had to go through since playing in the national championship.
Yep. And then one game that I tuned into near the end because I saw how close it was number 1 Georgia going up against Kentucky. Georgia ended up winning that by 1 point, 13-12. And frankly, Kentucky didn't quite have the killer edge. They made the choice to kick a punt late in the fourth quarter when they could have, tried to go for it, try to keep their drive alive to, at least get a field goal to go up on Georgia. And Georgia ended up running out enough clock so that Kentucky only had like a Hail Mary left and they lost the game. But scary one for number 1 ranked Georgia for sure.
Right. Well, and again, this goes back to what Coach Rule said about Nebraska. Even a Georgia doesn't have all 3 factors of that, mental preparation, physical preparation, and emotional preparation. They were flat. Georgia was flat. And they went into a Kentucky stadium that was feeling their backs were against the wall. Because remember, Kentucky lost in a bit of an upset to South Carolina the week before, right? In a game where people were expecting Kentucky to win it, and they lost to South Carolina at home. So the Kentucky faithful, responded and ended up with a darn good effort in this game, and Georgia just didn't match it.
Very true. And last one I'll mention, just because it struck my eye and raised my eyebrow since we'll be playing them later this year, is Indiana versus UCLA. They crushed them pretty good, 42-13. They've got a good quarterback there as well, so they're a team I'm watching out for.
Absolutely. Well, and it's interesting, Indiana's opponents haven't been all that great, except for UCLA. You look at it and you realize, okay, that's a Big Ten school, and they have some real talent on this squad, but they are transitioning to a new coach. And, it was very odd and weird, the circumstances where their coach left them, for a coordinator position and all that. And then the interview process and the selection of this new coach was a little weird. You'll recall that our defensive coordinator, White, was a finalist for that job, interviewed for it and such. And they ended up going with a guy who was a former player for UCLA. So I think he's going through some growing pains right now. So, it might have been that Indiana happened to be playing a team that wasn't very motivated to be there. And if that's the case, then I don't want to overreact. I'm curious to see what happens with Indiana over these next couple of weeks, because, of course, we're going to be facing them very soon. And I'm hoping they come down to earth a little bit.
I would agree. Now, looking at week 4, there are a few big games within the conferences. Now that we're getting into the conference play, in the Big 12, number 12 Utah is playing against number 14 Oklahoma State, with Oklahoma State at home. We don't need to give a score prediction for that one, but what's your thoughts? I would give the edge to Oklahoma State there, I think, but Utah has been pretty good too.
Yes, well, and historically, and in terms of coaches, I love Utah's coach. So I lean to Utah for that reason. But it is at home, and Oklahoma State has shown some tremendous resilience. They were getting their butts handed to them in a previous game, and then came back to win it. Right, so Oklahoma State's got some talent. They always do. And their coach is pretty darn good also. He's a little bit of a nut job and quirky, but he's a darn good coach. So since they have it at home, I would say I'd give it to Oklahoma State, but barely. And it wouldn't shock me at all if Utah goes in there and just physically beats them, because that's what they usually do. I don't know much about Utah this year.
Right. And then the big one in the Big Ten is USC versus Michigan. This is a home game for Michigan. So one of the biggest games for them so far. Obviously, they've already played Texas, so they've already played a top level team. USC is a bit below that level, at least in terms of the ranking. But I am definitely concerned for my Michigan brethren for this one. I'm not sure it'll go well.
I would agree with you. I think that they're not ready for the complete team that USC is demonstrating that they have become. It sure looks like USC's defense is markedly better than it was last year, and USC's offense is every bit as good as it's been, and that combination should be quite lethal. And I would put USC right up in the top 3 or 4 teams in the conference right now, and Michigan wouldn't be in that group.
Yeah, I would have to agree. So even though it's a home game for Michigan, I'm going to go ahead and predict that USC wins that one. Let's say, like you say, they might be a little lower scoring. So let's say it's 38 USC to 17 Michigan.
Yeah, good call on that. I'm gonna say Michigan's maybe gonna score a little bit more. So, but I'm gonna say let's do 42-21 USC.
Okay. And then kind of similarly, similar kind of matchup in the SEC, where you've got number 15 Oklahoma who's playing at home going up against Tennessee, who's ranked 6th. And Tennessee's put up some pretty wild numbers in their games so far. Now, admittedly, they haven't played super tough opposition, but it's clear they've got an offense that's forced to be reckoned with.
Right. And Oklahoma still just doesn't look like they have it together to me. So I'm a big believer in the Tennessee thing. And did you say that's at Oklahoma though?
Yes.
It's at Oklahoma. That's the only thing that will keep this from being a massive blowout, in my view. But I still think Tennessee wins this thing by at least 3 touchdowns. So let's go 35-14.
Yeah, looking back at it, Oklahoma had a close game against Houston in their second game of the year, only winning 16-12. And then last week they fought against Tulane and won, but not impressively, 34-19. So yeah, I would say in terms of trajectories, even though it's a home game for Oklahoma, I'm going to give it to Tennessee, and I'll go ahead and predict that it's a bit higher scoring. So let's say Tennessee ends up winning 49-21 over Oklahoma.
Okay. You're probably, I like your score better than mine already.
Yeah. So, yep, college football is fully in gear now. It feels crazy that we're already at week 4. We're like a month in, but we're getting into the conference season, so it'll be great games weekend and week out from now on. And as I mentioned, this 4-game stretch for Nebraska is crucial. We got over the first hump. We got over the first 3 games, which is great. We're already doing better than last year in that regard. But I think it's critical we win against or against Illinois rather, because as I mentioned, we play against Purdue and Rutgers next, which I think are doable for us. I'm not as scared of those teams, even though some of them are away. And then I think that'll give us the extra bit of confidence we need to go into that Indiana game, which is away. And like you say, we'll see how Indiana does in the time in between as well. But I think that'll be another tough challenge for us to prep us for that Ohio State game.
Right. Well, I tell you, I could absolutely see Nebraska being 7-0 going into the Ohio State game. I could also see us being 3-4. I mean, that's none of these are going to be gimme games. This Illinois game scares me because of Illinois' coach, who I have great respect for, and who just knows how to win, who knows how to play Big Ten football. And I'm not sure we know that. I can't say that with confidence about Nebraska. And we have a freshman quarterback, and they don't. They have a guy who took his lumps last year and is now in his second season as a starter. And that means something now that we're in league play. But we are at home. So that's why I'm predicting a victory for us in this Illinois contest. If we can win here, I feel really good about our ability to leverage a win this weekend into a win the following weekend at Purdue, and then we play Rutgers, who is another team that's really doing great. Right, their offense is prolific. Their head coach is outstanding again. So that's the thing, is we're facing Brett Belima, Bellama, and then Shiano at Rutgers, who has his formula that made him successful when he was there before. He has probably one of the best, if not the best, running back in the league, and he's got a great defense. And you give him that, and he's going to be tough to beat. But again, we play Rutgers in Lincoln, so right. All of a sudden we're 6-0 going into that Indiana game, and we'll see where Indiana's at. But if we're 6-0 going into that game, I maybe feel a little better about where we are.
Right. I just looked it up because I was curious. So yeah, Rutgers has blown out the two teams they've played so far. They're definitely far lesser competition, but they've only played 2 games. They actually have a bye going into Virginia Tech this weekend, and then Washington. So they play Washington before they play us. So I think these next 2 games will be the real test for them of like where they're at.
Well, and I just don't know how prolific Washington is. In looking at that schedule, is that Washington game out in Washington, or is it at Rutgers?
Let's see. No, it is at Rutgers.
Okay, so I actually give Rutgers the advantage right now in that game. I know that sounds crazy given the recent history with Washington, but that's what I feel. So they're going to be coming off the high, in all likelihood, of a huge victory for their program, beating a named school like Washington. The other thing is I think we have a bye week before we play Indiana, if I remember correctly.
Yes, we do.
So that would be the other thing, is that if we can get to the 6-0 and beat a Rutgers, then we would have 2 weeks to prepare for Indiana. And then I really like our chances to beat Indiana, and we'd be 7-0 then going into that. But, again, all a bunch of crappy speculation. We could just as easily be 3-4.
Yeah. Well, and the last thing I'll say is that I think a key test for Dylan in this game will be whether or not we get up early, or if we're behind and we find ourselves in a dogfight, because that's one thing he hasn't encountered so far this year. We've done a good job of scoring early and getting off to a good lead, and then being able to generally maintain that lead throughout the game. But how does Dylan react when he is put under pressure when we're behind, and he feels like, he maybe has to force a throw that he wouldn't do if we were in the lead? That's something I'm curious to see when we get in that situation.
I totally agree. And that those moments are going to come, and they're not all going to be fabulous.
Very true. So we want to thank you out there for listening to this episode of the podcast. You can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can also follow us if you search for us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can leave us a rating or a review there. We always love listening to fan feedback. We'll read your comments out on the air. So thank you all out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode. And until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.